right. Hello again, Avengers, and welcome to another exciting daily vlog. This is daily vlog number, I got no clue, maybe like 312? 312 I think is what it is. Yep, 312. There we go. So, today, last night, I beat Dragon Age the Veilguard. My first playthrough took me somewhere around like 52 to 55 hours. I don't remember exactly. But around that level of a little over 50 hours, a little under 60 hours. So I did a first impressions review. This is going to be my final review on the subject. I'm going to say right now, the review portion of this is going to have some mild spoilers, because in order to talk about some of the things that I liked and some of the things I didn't like, I'm going to have to talk about specifics of the game. I'm not going to reveal huge plot points, but there will be certain decisions that I talk about because I think they affect how the game plays. For anyone wanting to know my opinion without the risk of spoilers, this is my super short, sweet review of Dragon Age the Veilguard. It is a good game with a lot of flaws. Now, if you watch my my initial first impressions review, my thoughts was it's a fun game, not a good game. And the last part of the game really sold me from going, it's fun, it's just not very good, to it's a good game, it's just a very flawed good game. So if the first like 10 or to 20 hours of the game is a bit frustrating to you, I can tell you it does get better. And this is not one of those, oh man, the game just gets really, really good after 20 hours. No, the game is fun right from the beginning, but there's a lot of things that annoyed me right from the beginning that the fun of the game was kind of making up for, but wasn't enough for me to go, this is a good game. As the game goes on, the annoying bits become less and less noticeable. I don't know if it was because I got numb to them or whatever. And the bits that are fun, the bits of the game that are really interesting and engrossing, become more and more prevalent. So if you can get over the annoying things, you're probably going to have a good time with this game. If action RPGs that are very story heavy are your thing. If you're looking for an extremely tactical experience, you're going to be upset by this. It's not very tactical at all. Although there are tactics that you can employ, it is much more of an action RPG. And if you were looking for a massive open world explore fest, this also is not the game for you. I would have a hard time calling any portion of this game quote unquote open. There is a decent amount of exploration, but it's very kind of level based, where you have these very defined path-oriented levels that have quite a bit of nooks and crannies that you can go around and explore, in some optional areas, but it is in no way, shape, or form the open world experience that Dragon Age Inquisition was. So, that being said, that is my non-spoiler portion of this review. Now I'm going to be talking about the nitty-gritty. I'm going to talk about some plot points. I will not be revealing the end or anything like that. But there are certain aspects of the game that are tied very specifically to plot points that I have to talk about. So this is your final warning. I'm not going to say spoilers for the rest of this. This is your final warning. There are spoilers in the rest of this video. Okay? Let's move on. So, the game itself, as I've said before, is fun. And I don't just mean, oh, the combat's fun. I mean, overall, all the aspects of the game, when you mix them together, the end result, for the most part, is fun. That being said, there are a lot of flawed aspects to this game that if you focus on any one of them or a couple of them too much, the fun is gone. Let's talk about the elephant in the room right now. The game got massive backlash because of what a lot of people are calling woke garbage. I'm here to tell you, the idea of this game being this just woke piece of nonsense is not true. However, I'm pretty sure that's what the game wanted to be. And due to the fact that the writing staff simply did not have the experience and skill to write the story that they wanted to, I think it is merely an accident that it wasn't this massive woke thing. And what I mean by woke, quote unquote, because a lot of people are, well, you can't define woke. I'll define it for you right now. Woke is putting the identity of a character as the central part of the character. That is the thing that identifies all of their motivations. The most interesting aspect of a character is how they identify, not their background, not the choices that they make, not the people around them, not the events happening around them. Everything is focused on who they are. And that is bad writing. Just in general, if the most interesting thing about your character is that they identify with something, then you have a very, very boring character. And there is one character who is relatively one note throughout the game. That character is a Kunari dragon hunter named Tosh. The idea of Tosh is really interesting. Just phenomenally interesting and fun. They are a Kunari that was taken away from the Kun, which that's basically the religion of the Kunari, which also happens to be kind of the governing force. Think of any religiously run country where the major religion is very ingrained in the government and everything, and helps to direct policy and the things like that. That's basically what the Kun is. So Tosh, her mother took her away from the Kun to grow up in Rivania, or Rivani, something like that. Which is where basically a lot of Kunari are that don't want to be involved in all the nonsense of the Kun and the just massive warlike nature of that society. That in and of itself is really... Oh, and while she's there, she has this special ability that allows her to breathe fire like a dragon, which is an extremely rare thing for Kunari. And it makes her very, very special. That in and of itself is a really interesting story. And they flirt with a lot of the ideas that brings up. The idea of, okay, do I want to accept my heritage and where I was born and kind of accept the special person that I am in the society that I am? Or do I want to break from tradition and do I want to kind of chart my own path and things like that? That in and of itself is really interesting and really cool. And they flirt with that storyline throughout all of it. However, the major defining feature of the character is that they are non-binary. And they specifically use that term multiple times throughout the campaign. Now, a lot of people will say that's immersion breaking because in this hyper fantasy world, which is meant to mimic a medieval European style environment, using a term like non-binary just feels really, really weird. First of all, it's a very technical scientific term. For anyone that doesn't know, binary is a scientific term. It's actually used in science all the time. It's actually used in computer programming as well. Binary literally just means two. It is a system where there are two different options. Binary code is the kind of basics of how all computers work. And it's people describe it as ones and zeros. That's not technically what it is. It's basically just on and off. That's how binary code works. Is you this signal is either on or off, and that's what 1 and 0. 1 is on, 0 is off. So that term is a really, really new term. It was not something that has been used, like its use is really, really blown up in the past like 5 to 10 years, but it really wasn't used just about anywhere more than about 20-ish years ago, maybe 30 years ago. So when you're looking at a society that's meant to be mimicking a medieval society, having someone come up and go, yeah, I'm non-binary, feels really weird because it's just a strange term. And again, the science that created the word non-binary would not really exist for another few hundred years. So even if we're going to just accept for argument's sake that the idea of the gender binary not actually but being a thing and it being more of a spectrum is something that's there. The fact that they're using that particular term just doesn't feel right. It probably would have gone over a lot better if they had come up with their own term for non-binary that just fit the language better. But it is what it is, and the reason that I say the biggest part of Tasha's character is the fact that they're non-binary is because it fuels almost every decision that they make. There are very few decisions that are made in the game that are not influenced by Tosh being non-binary and seeing who is going to accept them. There's a couple different scenes that happen in the Giga game that have been leaked and everyone has ripped apart, where Tosh is talking about their non-binary nature, and there's one where Tosh is speaking with her mother, and her mother kind of flips out at her. There's another one where Tosh is speaking with a character from Dragon Age 2, who is a companion from Dragon Age 2, who is just a friend and employer of Tosh in the Veilguard, where they accidentally misgender to Tosh, and then they force themselves to do push-ups as a form of penance. And it all is just really, really preachy, first of all, and it's just poorly written. The scenes themselves were not designed to move the story forward. They were designed to lecture the audience about the proper way to deal with a non-binary person and the immense amount of persecution that someone being non-binary has to deal with every single day of their life. I am not going to argue about how realistic the portrayal of a non-binary individual's issues in the real world is. I am going to critique the dialogue writing, and this is true about the entire game. The dialogue writing is just not great. It's very wooden. The deliveries are very flat. I actually, after I talked about how the deliveries felt flat, I actually went and looked to see who the voice director is. There is no voice director for this game, or at least they don't list a voice director anyway. So that means more like the one person I was able to find that claims to be the voice director is a producer. So more likely than not, that means that the person, because you do need to have someone that's kind of directing all the actors. And again, there had to be, because all of the actors have very similar line deliveries, so there had to be someone at the helm. And the fact that it wasn't an actual voice director, it was a producer, really does explain why the deliveries just feel so bad and so flat. Someone was telling voice actors how to act that doesn't understand how to do that. Now, the producer that claims that they were the voice director, They do have a history with the Dragon Age franchise. They actually have done voiceover work for the Dragon Age franchise before, and they've actually produced for the Dragon Age franchise before. I've said this many, many times. The ability to do something does not give you the ability to teach someone else how to do that thing. They're two very different skill sets, and directing is even more different than simply teaching someone how to do something. Directing is not only kind of teaching someone how to do something, but also being able to get the performance that you need out of a person. And that's a very, very different skill set that I think this producer just simply doesn't have. So going back to Tosh, so much of their storyline is just, I'm non-binary, and that's the most important thing. That's the most interesting thing about me, which it isn't. There were so many other interesting things about the character, but it always comes back to that over and over and over and over. If that is going to be your breaking point for the game, there's nothing I can do for you. That being said, outside of Tasha's storyline, there is very little quote-unquote woke garbage in this. Very, very little. There's that scene where there's an item called Varric's shaving mirror. When you look into it, it's basically the turn transgender dialogue options on. That's what the mirror is there for. It's just a button that makes it so that you can use the fact that your character is transgender in the dialogue choices. I didn't turn it on for my game, and I'm probably never going to turn it on because, if anyone is unaware, I am not transgender. I have never questioned my gender. I sincerely doubt I am ever going to question my gender. I am a man. I am male. And I'm perfectly fine with that. And to be perfectly honest, things like pronouns in reference to me makes me very, very uncomfortable. I don't like that particular aspect. It has a lot to do with my PTSD. So I'm a person that is never going to put my pronouns in my bio. It makes me extremely uncomfortable. Does that mean I think no one should do it? Absolutely not. It's just something that I don't enjoy for me personally. It doesn't bother me when other people do it. It's just something I personally don't want to do. And so I am never going to turn that option on. I'd like to, because I'd like to see how it changes the story, but it just makes me very uncomfortable. And so I don't want that to be a part of my game. So that being said, because I didn't turn that on, other than Tasha's storyline, there really wasn't a whole lot of quote-unquote woke garbage. The character that I played, the background that I chose, is the Shadow Dragons. Shadow Dragons are anti-venatory rebels. They are anti-slavery and anti-establishment, effectively. As much as some people may claim that that's a very left-wing, it's not really. The entire world, left, right, center, whatever, has been anti-slavery for a few hundred years at this point. And the idea of not liking the aristocracy running your country is, again, not really a left or right thing. Nobody really likes the aristocracy anymore, other than the aristocracy. The rest of the game, I just really don't see. Yeah, the character creator has the option to give yourself top scars. Whoop-de-fucking-do. Again, I collected every outfit I possibly could for my Rook. That's your characters. They're called Rook. I collected every single outfit I possibly could for my character. The times where you might have been able to see your top surgery scars is maybe 2 out of the 150 outfits show a little bit more chest than normal. None of them show a lot of chest. You are almost exclusively wearing a shit ton of clothing this entire time. So it's nonsense. So for anyone that's going, oh god, it's just woke garbage, it really isn't. It is one storyline tied to one character who has some aspects to them that could be cool, but they decided that it was more important to base the entirety of their storyline about being non-binary, which is just a bad writing decision. It's what it is. So get that out of the way. It is not quote unquote woke garbage. It is poorly written for the most part, but it's not woke garbage. Aside from that one storyline that I will 100% say I sincerely considered not interacting with its storyline just because of how badly it was written. So that being said, let's talk about the actual game now. So gameplay-wise, I'm going to take a drink. Gameplay-wise, I mentioned this before. This is a very action-oriented RPG. And what I mean by that, if you played Dragon Age Inquisition or Dragon Age 2, the original Dragon Age was a tactical turn-based RPG. It was done it was a real-time turn-based RPG. And what I mean by that is, while yes, everything was done in real time, you still basically had turns where you had a set number of attacks you did and a set number of things that you can do. It's just each turn lasted a specific amount of time. It's the same thing that they did with the Baldur's Gate style RPGs, Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, Icewind Dale, things like that. And that entire genre, Neverwinter Nights basically did this as the same thing. That entire genre of CRPGs, it's the same basic thing. But it is a little bit more tactical because as much as it's in quote-unquote real time, you can pause it and direct multiple people in that. Beginning with Dragon Age 2 and then getting exemplified in Dragon Age Inquisition, it went to a more action-oriented combat style. You had an attack button, but it was mostly just hold it so you can do extra damage. And then you had a bunch of abilities that would be on cooldowns, and you had like dodges and stuff like that to get out of area of effects. Your kind of standard action RPG. The thing with both Dragon Age 2 and Dragon Age Inquisition is they are very ability based. Your basic attacks are really just there to use when you don't have an ability or skill ready to use. The majority of your damage comes from your skills and making sure you use them in the best way possible. When we go to Dragon Age the Veilguard, that is not the case. When you first get your first ability, using it drains your entire resource bar. For my mage character, it was my mana. Using one ability completely drained my mana, and I couldn't use it again until I used enough basic attacks to fill it fully up. I had 2 magic, or technically I had 100 magic points, but everything's done in deviations of 50. Most of your abilities will be either 50 or 100 magic points to use. And so as much as, yes, you do have 100 mana points, you have 2. You do them 50 magic point increments. And so the first ability that you get that is built into the character uses 100 mana points. It uses your entire mana pool, and then it takes a decent amount of time to rebuild it. So the game itself is much more focused on you using your quote-unquote basic attacks. They have your kind of standard brawler button combination where you have quote-unquote light and heavy attacks, but they're not really that. For my character, the mage, my quote-unquote light attacks were, depending on whether I was using my staff or my dagger and orb, were more long-range attacks. And my heavy attacks for the staff was an area attack. It just put this big crescent slash thing out. And for the orb and dagger, it was attacks with my dagger. But they both were generally area attacks. So I think it would have made more sense, instead of calling them light and heavy, to call them like quick and area or something like that, because it made a little bit more sense that way. But you have to use a combination of those attacks, and you can charge both your light and your heavy attacks to do more damage at the cost of just taking longer. You just hold the button and it takes longer to do the attack. It does more damage. You can do things like break the guard of someone who's blocking all of your attacks, stuff like that. You also have a dodge button, which I believe for most characters you will have. If you press it once, you will just dodge. If you double tap it, you will do a longer style dodge. For the mage, a single tap was just you move, and a double tap is you teleport. Very simple, very easy. And then you had a block or a parry button, which again worked exactly like you would think it is. It does. There are perfect block type instances. There's also perfect dodge type instances where you can, depending on how you build your character, you can get bonuses. So the combat in the game is very action oriented. It's much faster than Dragon Age Inquisition or Dragon Age 2. Everything is faster, especially when you get towards the end game. You will have dozens of enemies all trying to attack you at the same time, and you have to figure out, is it better for me to try blocking at this point? Is it better for me to use area attacks, use ability attacks, use detonation attacks? It becomes a little bit chaotic, and I played on the kind of normal difficulty setting, not the super hard, not the super easy, the one that's dead set in the middle. And with a few rare exceptions, I never really felt like it was too much. There's a few situations where there's just so much going on and they flood you with so many different things to do that I got frustrated, but I never really felt like, quote unquote, the game is cheating or anything like that. The other thing that I really like about the combat, the way that you interact in combat is going to be affected massively by the skill tree. And the skill tree in Dragon Age Inquisition, you start in the center, and there's going to be a ring, a bunch of different skills that radiate out from the center that eventually lead to 3 different specializations. And the specialization I chose for my mage was the Spellblade, which is an Antivan style that focuses on the orb and dagger, and it was a massive amount of fun. I had an absolute blast playing in this character, but because I chose specific nodes and specific things, it massively changed how I played, to the point where in the entire game, after the prologue, I used a staff for maybe half an hour of my, maybe an hour, of my like 50 plus hour playthrough. I used a staff for maybe an hour. And changing between staff and orb and dagger is as simple as you push the down button on the controller pad. You can switch mid-combat anytime. You always have a staff equipped, and you always have an orb and dagger equipped as a mage. And I just never used it, despite the fact that I had some really awesome staves that did amazing stuff, and it has a significantly longer range than the orb and dagger. Because of the nodes that I chose on the skill tree, I just built this character to exclusively use the orb and dagger, and it worked really well for me. It was an absolute blast to play. I was dashing around, and I had this ability that allowed me to basically teleport to someone and just use my dagger and then conjure a second electric dagger and just stab them, and big explosion. It was a massive amount of fun. I used that ability constantly. Just everything I did was dash, splode, dash, splode. It was a blast to play. The other thing that's interesting about this, your allies are invincible. You cannot play as them, and they cannot die. Well, that makes this really... No. The thing with your allies is if you leave them alone, they will fight on their own, and that's perfectly fine. But all of the abilities that they have that you can upgrade, they will only activate when you tell them to. And there's 2 different ways to do that. One, they have shortcuts where you can hold a button and use your abilities, but it also gives you the ability to use your allies' abilities without kind of pausing the game to bring up the ring menu. I never used that. I was 30 some odd hours into the game before I realized you could do that. And I only figured it out because I watched a friend stream the game. The way that I generally use their abilities, if you hold the R1 button on my PS5, it's different for everybody else. Right bumper for Xbox, and then whatever in the hell it is for the keyboard. What that does is it brings up a ring menu, and you can still aim and move around your reticule to kind of pick targets. But the gameplay pauses as long as you're holding that, and then you can basically pick the abilities that you want to use and you want your allies to use. And the reason this is such a big deal is detonation combos. There's a few different debuffs you can add that can detonate. They are I think it's overpowered, weakened, and then another one that's blue that I can't remember what it's called. But these three abilities, they each have, or overwhelmed, weakened, and the third one. They each have a different symbol. And the way they work is they're a debuff. They do something like overwhelmed makes them take more damage. Weakened makes them deal more damage. The other one is like an armor debuff. It reduces their armor. So while they have that, those debuffs work the exact way you'd think. However, there are abilities called detonator abilities, and they detonate a particular thing. So there are overwhelmed detonators, and they will specifically say detonates overwhelmed. And if you hit a target that is overwhelmed with a detonates overwhelmed ability, not only will they take extra damage, but they will actually explode. There will be this big explosion of damage that hurts them and everybody around them. And that's a major mechanic. When you are paused using that right bumper, if you select an ability that primes a target, that's what they call when you put those special debuffs on them, is the target is primed, it will highlight the abilities that will detonate that. And if you choose an ability that detonates a particular prime, it will highlight what abilities will give the priming that thing detonates. And so the most common way that I used my allies to techniques is that I would hold I would hold R1, I'd pick a target, and then I would choose my ability and the ally's ability that would cause a detonation. And that works really, really well. And depending on the equipment that you choose and the skills that you do, you can make your detonations more powerful. You can make your detonations work differently. It's a really, really cool, fun mechanic. And so as far as a kind of tactical style gameplay, that's as tactical as it gets, is choosing the abilities that they use. And not all of their abilities are detonators. There are abilities that just do damage or just do different kinds of debuffs that aren't primers. And then there are just straight buffs. There are heals in this game. So your kind of strategic choices in this are, do I want to focus on doing detonations and doing lots of damage? Do I want to focus on buffing myself and my allies? Do I want to focus on just doing damage with each different ability and stacking various debuffs? There's some strategy to it, but it's not Dragon Age Origins. It's never going to be Dragon Age Origins again, because, again, back in Dragon Age 2, they moved away from that, and the RPG market in general has been moving away from those very tactical style RPGs for a long time now. So anyone that's going, God, I thought this was going to go back to Dragon Age Origins, it's never going to happen. That style of combat was not particularly popular when Dragon Age Origins came out. It just happened that Dragon Age Origins did it really, really well. But now there really aren't almost any games other than nostalgia bait games that use that style of combat because it's just not popular. I'm not saying it's a bad style, I'm saying it's not popular. So the combat in and of itself is really fun to a point. Again, there is that kind of combo based thing. Like I had an ability where if I hit my light attack 3 times and then hit the strong attack, I would throw my dagger and it would go out and come back like throwing a lightsaber. That was an extremely powerful ability. But almost half the time that I would do it, the game would not register it correctly. And instead of throwing my dagger and staying away from the bad stuff, I would leap forward with my dagger in hand, doing less damage, doing less attacks, because when you throw it, it hits like 3 or 4 times. I would do 1 attack, and I would jump right into the bad area I was attempting to avoid. That was unbelievably annoying. I vehemently despised it, but it wasn't enough for me to stop having fun. When the combat works, it is a blessing. It is amazing. And if they can release a patch or something that makes the button inputs read better, this game would be perfect combat-wise. With just how janky it is as far as doing the combos correctly, I don't believe it's something that they can fix. I think it's ingrained into the engine itself that they were using. So I'm not holding my breath for them ever fixing that, especially since they announced that not only is there not going to be any DLC for the Veilguard, they're not going to... they've taken the majority of the staff to move them over to the new Mass Effect game. So, yeah. Again, this game could have been amazing, and it's just good. So, yeah. So that being said... moving on from the combat, the actual world in and of itself, as I mentioned before, this is not an open world game. And for the first probably about 5 or 6 hours is extremely linear. As in, you will be given a quest, you have to do that quest, and you can only go where that quest allows you to go. There's very little exploration. They don't really reward exploration very well in the early parts of the game. And that was a huge turnoff for me, especially coming from Dragon Age Inquisition, where after the first mission, you're dropped in the hinterlands and you have this massive area. You can just go anywhere. And the only thing that really limits your ability to explore is some areas have really strong enemies, and other areas have a dragon. So that was really freeing and fun. And as Inquisition went on, you would open up more and more places to explore, a lot of which were technically entirely optional. If the only thing that you did was focus on the main story quest of Dragon Age Inquisition, there's like 3 or 4 entire areas you never would visit because they're completely optional. There's nothing that happens in those areas that is linked to the main storyline. So going to Dragon Age the Veilguard, it is extremely linear at first. After, again, you get about like 6-ish hours in and you've unlocked most of the kind of major areas that you can go to, the game starts to open up. And this is one of the things that I find really, really interesting. Each one of your companions has a specific interaction ability that they have. For example, one of the first companions you get... and she's majorly shown off in the marketing material, is Nev. Nev is a magic detective. She is one of the most badass characters in the game. She's super, super cool. She's super hot. I love everything about her. Also, she's disabled. She has a prosthetic, I think, right leg. And one of the things that I really, really liked about the game is they never bring it up. They never go, oh, this would be so much easier if I had both of my legs, because that's how most people write disabled characters, is everything is about the disability. They always have to make sure that you know they're disabled, And Nev never once brings up her prosthetic. Ever. And it doesn't stop her from being a super amazing badass. The prosthetic she has is basically, if you're, there's a type of prosthetic called a blade, or a running blade. And what it is instead of it looking like a real foot or anything, it looks like here's the bottom of your foot here. Like this, let's say like this is the bottom of your foot. Instead of it just going down and having like a shoe, it has this like little curved thing. And the reason it has that is that little curve absorbs impact significantly better. And so people that want to do a lot of running, especially if you want to do it more kind of competitively or professionally, instead of using a traditional prosthetic, which can cause issues with stress fractures and things like that, use the blade. That's effectively what her prosthetic is. It's a very fantasy-esque, magical-looking blade. So, again, compared to the whole thing of, I'm non-binary, well, that's a term that wouldn't exist for a few hundred years, but sure, let's go with that. This doesn't look that out of place. It fits with the character really well. And again, I didn't notice it until I was just watching a cutscene and went, wait a minute, what's that on her? Holy shit, she has a prosthetic. That's super cool. So anyway, Nev's interaction ability is she is a frost mage and she can freeze certain things. Now, it's not an ability that you can just, shoot around freezy stuff. No, there are going to be certain interactable items that when you highlight them with the R1 button, it will show who can interact with it. And it's mostly used for puzzle solving and for kind of Metroidvania-esque exploration, where once you have a certain companion and their subsequent ability, it allows you to reach new areas. That in and of itself is really interesting. And it could have been used to actually give weight to who you have in your party, because if you don't have the right character, you might not be able to progress, which could frustrate a lot of people. So their solution was, whenever you don't have the party, Rook can just do it. Rook can do everything. As soon as you unlock a companion, if you don't have them in their party, Rook just magically has all of their abilities and can do literally absolutely everything. From a gameplay perspective, totally get it. It would be, because changing party members requires you going to basically a fast travel point, and you cannot change party members unless you're at a fast travel point. It would get very, very annoying that you would get to a certain place and go, shit, I don't have the right party member. Or places that require multiple different party members' abilities to get through them. It would be like, well, we can only ever have an area that has two different mechanics in it. And that would mean that in order to go through that area, you are required to have two very specific party members. I get why they didn't want to do that. But on the same end, from a lore perspective, it was dumb, because they never really explain why Rook is able to do literally everything. You have this dagger thing that is a central plot point MacGuffin for the entire game. And the dagger, anytime you do something that you don't have the companion there for, he just takes the dagger out and the dagger can magically do it. They never explain why, which is a problem throughout the entire game, is they will just put things in there and never take the time to go, well, this is why it works that way. They just go, well, we fixed it. Well, how does it work? Doesn't matter. It works. And that's really annoying. So that in and of itself, a little bit boring. But the fact that each one of your companions will actually contribute to a more kind of Metroidvania-style exploration, that in and of itself is really, really cool. The other thing that's interesting about your companions in general is every other Dragon Age game, your companions are basically a version of the main character. And what I mean by that is anything your companions can do, generally you can do too, aside from maybe one special ability that they have that other characters don't. But like Dragon Age Inquisition, the skill tree for the Inquisitor is identical to the skill tree of every other companion, aside from the fact that the Inquisitor gets to choose their specialization and the companions don't. But you have access to the same exact abilities. And again, because Inquisition is ability based, that means that one companion, there's a very good chance that one companion is going to be a carbon copy of your Inquisitor, because they have access to the exact same abilities and the exact same specialization. In Dragon Age the Veilguard, your abilities are unique to you. No one can do the things that you do. And the abilities for each of your companions are unique to them, to a point. Most of the companions, I think there's only 2 that don't, have a healing ability. And most of the healing abilities work in similar fashions. There's 2 flavors. There's insta-heals, and then there's recovery over time heals. But for the most part, that's how it works. Each companion has 6 different abilities, of which you can have 3 on their ability bar at any given time. But each ability is unique to that character. There's no way that you can get the Grey Warden, that I can't remember his name, I think it's Darius or something similar to that. There's no way that you can get his ability to have his pet griffin come in a fireball and strike the enemy. That ability doesn't exist no matter what you do as your character. And that in and of itself is really cool. I think that's always been one of my biggest problems with Dragon Age in general, is there was always going to be a redundant companion. Once you chose your specialization, you were going to be very similar, if not identical, to one of your companions. And unless you basically wanted to have the same character twice, there is no real reason to ever use one of your companions. That doesn't happen in Dragon Age the Veilguard. Each companion has their own list of abilities. Each ability has its own upgrade skill tree. And you will only ever have enough skill points to upgrade fully 3 of the 6 abilities. So what I ended up doing is I just chose 3 abilities that kind of fit the playstyle that I was doing for each one of my companions, and I exclusively upgraded those 3 abilities. You don't have to do that. You can mix and match, so you can, because you can, anytime you're not in combat, you can change the abilities that people have equipped. So if you spread out your upgrades more, you can just switch and swap abilities at any given time. There's not a ton of reason to do that, because for the most part, other than certain abilities being detonators or primers, like Emmerich, the Necromancer, exclusively does necrotic damage. So if you were going into a fight and you're against enemies that resisted necrotic, there's nothing you're really going to be able to do to get his abilities to stop doing necrotic damage. It's just not how it works. You can't change damage types or that, but you can change the types of abilities, like maybe more focused fire versus area attacks, or buffs versus debuffs and stuff like that. So there is that. But again, the method that I chose was I just liked having 3 core abilities that I really liked and going forward with it. So getting back to the world itself, like I said, it is very kind of level based. I would almost more compare this to a Metroidvania than I would an open world RPG, because that's what you are. You have very defined stages that have very specific paths you can go through, that every so often have side paths or optional areas that you can find secrets and stuff like that in. But for the most part, it's significantly more linear than the previous Dragon Age game. It feels a lot closer to Dragon Age 2 exploration-wise than it does to Inquisition. And anyone that really didn't like Dragon Age 2, for that aspect of Dragon Age 2 where you were in a very set place, you're probably going to have problems with the exploration and world aspects of Dragon Age the Veilguard. Now, the thing that makes it very different from Dragon Age 2 was set entirely in the city of Kirkwall and the outlying areas of Kirkwall. It is a very small area that you explore. Not that the game itself was very, very small. It's a pretty decent sized game, but your focus is entirely on the city of Kirkwall. In Dragon Age the Veilguard, you are focused on Northern Thedas. You deal with more different different countries and different cultures in this game than any other Dragon Age game. Dragon Age Origins, you focused entirely on Ferelden, which is a city in southern Thedas. It's basically the eastern half of southern Thedas is Ferelden. That was the only thing you did. You didn't deal with anyone else. They talked about Tevinter. They talked about Orlais and Antiva, things like that. You never went anywhere near them. You were just in Ferelden. Dragon Age 2, you're not even just in a country. You were in a single city. You were just in Kirkwall. Dragon Age Inquisition, you deal with Ferelden, and you get to start learning about Orlais, which is basically the western half of southern Thedas. And so Inquisition was significantly more focused on Orlais than it was Ferelden. You do stuff in Ferelden, but Orlais was where a lot of the stuff happened, and most of the new information you got was about Orlesian culture. Dragon Age the Veilguard, you start off in the capital of the Tevinter Empire, Minrathous. And then you go to Antiva, and then you go to, I can't remember what it's called, it starts with an A, but it's basically an area where ancient elven societies used to live, so it's very Dalish focused. So you get to play around with a bunch of Dalish elves. Then you go to the Anderfell, which is where the Grey Wardens are from, and is basically permanently blighted. You also get to interact with some dwarven places from time to time. You get to go to this giant necropolis that is in the heart of a country called Navarre. Like, you deal with, in total, I think 5 different countries, which has never happened in a Dragon Age game before. Normally you're focused on one country. Possibly, again, Inquisition, you deal a little bit with both Ferelden and Orlais. But again, it's a very, very limited scope. This one, you get to interact with the entirety of Northern Thedas, which is significantly more varied than Southern Thedas, which is basically just Orlais and Ferelden. So that in and of itself is cool. But it also means that the writers basically got to flesh out 5 different complete cultures and complete societies. So if you're a lore hound, there's a lot to sink your teeth into. Again, it's not that we've never heard of Tevinter. We know Tevinter very well. Dorian from Dragon Age Inquisition was one of your companions. He is a magister from Tevinter, and you fought against the Venatori, which are basically the magocracy of Tevinter. So it's not that we didn't know about these. The Antivan Crows, a companion in Dragon Age Origins. I think he was one of the DLC companions, but he might have been in the base game. Zevran was an Antivan Crow. They're a society of assassins that kind of help run Antiva. They don't actually, but they have a lot of influence in Antiva. The Anderfels, again, is where the Grey Wardens are from. Weissapt is their big Grey Warden castle. It's like the major headquarters of the Grey Warden. The first main character you play in Dragon Age Origins, they are called the Warden Commander because they are a Grey Warden. And you learn all about the Grey Wardens. Like, Dragon Age Origins could be retitled as Dragon Age Wardens, because so much of Dragon Age Origins is about the Wardens and how they continually save the world after every one of these blights. Now we get to see where they're from. So that in and of itself is really, really cool and interesting. But each area is, again, very level-based. So if you're okay with more level-based Metroidvania style exploration, you're going to have a lot of fun with this. Again, if you're expecting Inquisition style open world exploration where you just randomly will come across quests and things like that, doesn't happen in the Veilguard, to the point where Dragon Age Inquisition, I don't think I've ever gotten close to beating every single quest in the game. For the Veilguard, I believe I did do 100% of the quests available in my playthrough. There are certain choices we'll talk about in a second that kind of lock off certain quests. But I did everything in my first playthrough. And had a lot of fun doing it too. So yeah, that's the kind of world. Moving on. Let's talk about the writing. I mentioned this in my first impressions video. The writing is subpar. And again, a lot of people point out the kind of quote-unquote woke garbage. As I mentioned before, the woke garbage outside of Tasha's storyline really isn't that prevalent. Unless you think like anti-slavery and anti-establishment is somehow woke garbage. I was going to say anti-capitalist, but they really aren't, because one of the major factions is two of the major factions are actually extremely money focused. So it's not really anti-capitalist. One of the battle cries is for glory and gold. So yeah. The writing in and of itself is just poorly done in general. One of the things that has been definitive for the Dragon Age franchise is what's called party banter. You'll always have more characters or more companions available to you than you can have in your party at any given time. And depending on the companions that you put into your party, while you're wandering around, they will have little conversations. And a lot of that banter is really fun. Some of my favorite bits of Dragon Age Inquisition was just wandering around with like Sarah and Blackwall in the party and just listening to them both speak at each other and completely miss the point of what either person is saying. They were really, really fun, interesting conversations. Anytime Varric was talking to Cassandra or the Frost mage, I can't remember her name. She was Orlesian. Anyway, there were a lot of funs. The banter in this game just sucks. There are two kinds of banter. One, hey, I'm going to point out exactly what happened and tell you why it happened and how you're supposed to feel about it happening. Oh, that's very good, and I agree. That is how we are supposed to feel about this particular incident. That's one version of dialogue. The second one is, hi, would you like to hear something that doesn't matter? Why, yes. I think things that don't matter are very nice to talk about. Very cool. Awesome. Hugs and kisses. Bye-bye. None of it feels organic. None of it feels like stuff that would actually happen. It's all in there with a very definitive purpose. Either it's meant to tell you how you're supposed to feel about the campaign thus far, or it is intentionally put in there to go, hey, look, we're all just, it's very much that thing of, hey, fellow kids, or we're just two wild and crazy guys. It feels like they're trying so hard to go, look at these people. They're so casual. And none of it feels organic. None of it feels real. None of it feels character driven. None of it feels motivation driven. It all has a very particular purpose. This one is, we're going to tell you how you're supposed to feel. And the other one is, hey, look, these are really casual, amazing people, and not all of our dialogue is telling you how to feel. None of it is very well written. The dialogue in and of itself, when you talk about cutscenes in that, is passable. It's not super well written dialogue, but it's not the worst stuff I've ever heard with a few rare exceptions. Again, the scene with Tosh and her mother doesn't make sense. They don't explain. They don't explain why her mother would get upset at Tosh for being non-binary, other than, well, she's just a mean mother, which isn't how it works. If you want to have a character act in an oppressive manner, there's a lot of different reasons why a parent or some authority figure might try to oppress someone else's choices, beliefs, whatever. It could be just flat out bigotry. They might have some sort of belief that that is an inferior form of thinking or way of being. And that is a real thing. Bigotry is a real thing. A lot of times, real bigotry looks nothing like what you'll see into the TV, because most of the people that are writing bigoted characters, first of all, a lot of them are bigoted themselves, and don't see themselves as bigoted. And second of all, have never actually been in a situation with an actual bigoted person. They just would declare people bigoted for disagreeing with them. And that's why so many depictions, like I made a vlog about it a while ago, about this really stupid YouTube channel that basically dramatizes quote-unquote real stories. And the one that they did was basically about this woman in a wheelchair trying to get into a fine dining establishment, and them being so incredibly upset that a cripple would want to come into their restaurant. And that's not what bigotry looks like against disabled people. I know, not only am I disabled, but my father was disabled the entirety of my life. And we had to deal with both hard and soft discrimination against my father constantly. And that's just not what it looks like. And so, yeah, the dialogue when they're doing stuff like that is obviously written either by people that are bigoted that don't realize that they're bigoted, or people that have never actually experienced bigotry and have just declared anyone that disagrees with them as bigoted. And that's where you get these characters that will just instantly go from 0 to 100 and say these horrible things for seemingly no reason other. Well, then they're a bigot. That's not a reason. Bigotry doesn't exist on its own. It's not something you're born with. It's not like a birthmark that you can't put away. Bigotry is taught. There's a song from musical called South Pacific by Rodgers and Hammersteins, called You've Got to Be Carefully Taught. It's sung by one of the male leads that I got to play once, named Lieutenant Cable. And the basics of it is you've got to be taught to hate and fear. You've got to be taught from year to year. It's got to be drummed in your dear little ear. You've got to be carefully taught. The entire purpose of the song is bigotry and racism is unnatural. 100% it is. And the only way that it works is it has to be taught from when you are very, very young, when your mind is still pliable. Because if you try to take an adult that has experienced the world and convince them that certain races or certain groups of people are just inferior non-human people, it doesn't make sense. And so the idea that just, well, you're a bigot. No, there has to be a way that they became that. They were brought up in a society or by parents that held these beliefs, and so they were bestowed upon them. They've had bad experiences with a certain group, and so they overreacted and decided that bad experience has painted the entire group that way. They have been misled by a cult or something similar to that, to where they've been somewhat brainwashed into believing that. But there has to be a motivation behind it. It can't just be, well, they're a bigot, so they do that. It's the same thing as, well, he's a bad guy, so he does bad things. No, bad guys are the heroes of their own stories. In their mind, they're the good guy. Everyone else is the bad guy. So if your motivation for a bad person doing bad things is they're a bad person, they do bad things, you have a poorly written character. And if your motivation for a bigot is, well, they're a bigot, they do bigoted things, you have a poorly written character. And that is what Tasha's mom is. She's a poorly written character that was really just there to provide proof for Tosh being oppressed. So aside from situations like that, the dialogue isn't inherently bad. It's just not good for the most part, with a few rare exceptions. And combine that with really flat delivery from most of the voice actors, and you get a really hard time caring about the characters. Because here's another thing that I think a lot of people don't quite realize. There's two different aspects to a story like this. There's the overarching story in the world itself, and then there's the individual characters. And you can get attached to one without getting attached to other. And the overarching plot of the Veilguard is actually pretty decent. I mean, they use a few tropes in there that get old pretty quickly, but for the most part, it's a really engaging story. And again, I have played 3 Dragon Age games. I am very invested in the world of Dragon. I played 3 Dragon Age games and played the tabletop RPG. I'm very invested in the world of Thedas. I'm very invested in what happens to the world and the kind of explanations of what the world is, because right from the beginning, you don't really understand what the Blight is, what archdemons are. All of that stuff just happens, and you're kind of like, okay, this is an archdemon. Okay. What's an archdemon? What's the thing that starts the Blight? Okay. Well, what's the Blight? It's bad stuff. Okay, well, where does it come from? Underground. How did it get there? I don't know. Okay, well, what makes an archdemon an arch? I don't know. And as you play through the various games, you start learning more and more about the world. You start learning what the Blight is and where it comes from. You start learning what the archdemons are and where they come from. You start learning about what the Veil is. And all these other things slowly come into place. And so the overarching story of Dragon Age the Veilguard is really interesting. And they throw a few curveballs in there that a few of them are just blatantly obvious. But for the most part, they're really fun and interesting. But the characters become significantly more difficult to care about because the line deliveries are very flat. The dialogue is not particularly well written. And the party banter, which is one of the things that endeared so many characters to players previously, is just bad. There's no other way to describe it. It's just bad. So near the end of the game, I was having, or throughout most of the game, one of the things that everybody does in Dragon Age games is you have romance options. And you can pick a character that you want to romance, and that's perfectly fine. I had the hardest time throughout the game trying to figure out if I even wanted to romance anyone. Like, I had no connection to any of these characters other than Lucanus because he's the coolest dude ever, but I didn't want to fuck him. I just liked adventuring with him. He's a cool guy. So I didn't want to romance Lucanus, and I didn't really want to romance anyone else. I eventually decided that I wanted to romance Bellara. Not because there was anything about the character that endeared her to me, but the only other character I was kind of interested in was Nev, and due to a choice that I made, Nev hated me. We'll talk about that in a second. And I never really felt a payoff for romancing Bellara. I found out later I made a decision at the very end of the game that prevented me from getting a sexy times scene with Bellara, which pissed me off because I didn't realize that would happen. Not that I chose Bellara specifically so I could have sexy times with her, but yeah, it annoyed me that I didn't realize that this choice I made, because I made the choice because I thought it was the right choice in the time, and it ended up just fucking me over. That's a theme we will come back to. So yeah, I had a really hard time connecting with the characters themselves. But the overall story was really interesting. It was really fun. The last part of the adventure, every single Dragon Age game, when you get to the basically like the final quest, I believe almost all of them, if not all of them, will say, if you accept this quest, you start the end game. You're going to only be able to do this quest, so if you have any other side quests, go do them. because this will finish it for you. So I did that, and in most Dragon Age games, like Dragon Age Inquisition, the final quest is like an hour-ish, depending on how long it takes you to go through it. It's like an hour and a half. The finale of Veilguard was like 3 or 4 hours. And it actually encompassed like 4 quests that had epic... Like, the finale of the Veilguard is epic. It really, really is. And it does something that they tried to do in Inquisition that kind of worked, but they really mastered it in the Veilguard. In the Veilguard, you're going up against the big baddie that I won't reveal, and you get your entire team together to fight against the big baddie. However, you can only ever have 2 other people in your party. So most games like this, it'll be something like, okay, we're all going to fight together. But to make things simpler, only you 2 are going to fight directly with me. The rest of you guys will just go, you will fight in other areas. Then you never hear about them again. This is not what happens here. The finale of the Veilguard. There are multiple situations where you're sitting down planning what's going to happen. And they will go, okay, we need to do this. And this ally group, which each different ally group, there's 5 or 6 different factions in the game. And each faction, as you do more quests and do more stuff with them, will get stronger. And they have a star rating, 1, 2, or 3 stars as far as how strong that particular faction is. And it's based entirely on how much you interact with them, how many side quests you do, and how much stuff you sell to them. So the factions, as you're planning this big final push to save the world, you have to like storm this impenetrable place, and there's all these different defenses. So each one of the factions will go, hey, we can take care of that, but we're not sure we can do it alone. And then you have to choose which one of your companions is going to help that faction do that result. And each companion, if you complete their quest line, they get this special mark that they're a hero of the Veilguard, which means that they are... You finish their quest line, you get an exclusive set of armor for them, which is... Most of them are really, really cool. I think the only one I didn't really like was... There's a choice you get to make at each one of the end of the companion quests that will give you one of 2 armors and will change how their story ends. The decision I made for Davrin, the Grey Warden character, the armor that they gave me for him looked kind of dumb. It wasn't horrible, but it wasn't my favorite armor I've ever seen him in. Mechanically, it was a great armor, but the look of it just wasn't cool. Everybody else, the armors that they got was super, super cool. So if they are a hero of the Veilguard, they have a specifically bigger chance of them succeeding in that aspect, that thing that they're doing. Also, each one of the things has a specific focus. Like there's one where, there are these magisters and there is a head magister that is leading them and attacking you. So we're going to send the crows, the assassins, to kill off the magister. However, they don't think they can do it on their own. So you have to choose someone to send with them. And it'll specifically say someone that either has experience being sneaky or fighting mages will do best in this area. So if you choose someone that has in their background that experience, there's a better chance of it going well. But that also means for that portion of the finale, you can't use that character in your party. And so you have to choose where each character goes based on what they're going to be best at and who you want to have in your party. Because if you choose the wrong people, then you are just left, because you will choose every single one of your allies except for two, and those two will be part of your party. So that in and of itself was really, really cool. And full-on Mass Effect levels, if things go wrong, characters die. Now, because I did absolutely everything, my playthrough, I got the technically best ending you could, because I did everything. And all of my allies, all my companions did their stuff with flying colors. But at the end, after you assign everything out, you will go into this massive cutscene where you get to see the characters that you chose doing the things that they were supposed to do, and it's fucking epic. It is amazing. Probably the best use of a party-based RPG I've ever seen. Because normally it's like, well, you guys all do other stuff, and the only people that are going to show up anywhere in the finale are the ones that are in your party. No. Every single member of your team not only shows up, but is fucking badass the entire time. And it's this massive, massive set piece. And the cutscenes in and of themselves are really, really good. I'm assuming they're done in engine because, again, you can choose any companion that you want and the companion shows up, but they're definitely higher quality. Like, they feel like cutscenes, not like in-engine stuff. So I don't know how they did it, but they looked glorious. They looked amazing. And then in addition to that, as you're fighting through with your chosen party, when things go well, you will get another short cutscene seeing your allies triumphing. And I would assume if things go poorly, you would get a cutscene of them bye-bye. And then as you're going, sometimes your allies, if they survived, will show up and help you out. It is insanely epic. Massively cool. So then that was the thing that basically took me from this is a fun game, not a good game, to this is a good game that is just very flawed. The ending was so amazing, and despite the fact that I hadn't really connected with most of the characters up until that point, the ending is so well done that I developed connections to every single character. And I was incredibly invested in every single one of them surviving and every single one of them having a happy ending. Like, it was phenomenal. But as I mentioned before, there were some choices that kind of upset me. Going back a little bit. One of the things that happens in this game often, like 3 or 4 different times, this exact same thing will happen, is you will be given a choice. The choice does not have a right answer, does not have a good answer. It is just 2 bad choices. I'm not opposed to the idea of there is no good choices. You just have to choose which bad choice is the less bad choice. I'm not opposed to something like that. But the first choice like that you get to make comes out of nowhere. And I am going to slightly spoil some specific plot details here. There's a point in time where both Minrathous and Antiva, or not Antiva, the city in Antiva that you go to, it's Trevino or something like that, are both attacked by dragons at the exact same time. And you can't save both of them. So, Nev, the character that you meet in the prologue, and is specifically tied not only to Minrathous, but the faction there, the Shadow Dragons, which is the faction that I chose. Nev wants you to go help Minrathous. And basically the justification is, if you don't help Minrathous, the city itself is going to be devastated by a dragon, which makes sense. But the Venatori are going to use the dragon attack to usurp the city and basically impose their own kind of version of martial law. Because up until that point, the Venatori were kind of a Mageocracy cult kind of thing, but they didn't technically run the city. They just influenced it a lot. And the justification is the Venatori are going to stop the influence thing entirely, and they're just going to take over the entire city. They're going to turn it into effectively a police state. On the other hand, in Trevino, if the dragon attacks Trevino, not only are a lot of people going to get hurt, but it's going to infect the water supply with blight, which is going to kill a bunch of civilians. They don't mention anything about civilians in Minrathous, but they do specifically say the water supply will be tainted and it will kill off a bunch of innocent civilians. So me, being the good guy that I am, I got to protect the innocent civilians. And so I went, despite the fact that I was a shadow dragon, so my background is connected with Minrathous, I went with Trevino. Also, Lucanus is from Trevino, and he's the coolest dude ever. And Lucanus was the one that was asking me, he's like, please, you have to help me. You have to help me save my people, in this cool Spanish accent. And I'm like, I can't say no to you. So I go and I do that, and invariably what happens, you're able to save Trevino, but Minrathous is devastated. Okay, it's perfectly fine. You know, the idea of there's no good choice, there's just a less bad one. It's totally expecting, oh, bad things are going to happen. But it's not just that. After you're done saving Trevino, you go to Minrathous to try and help them out. The dragon's already gone. And Nev excoriates you. She rips you an absolute new one, especially since I was a shadow dragon. She's like, you're a shadow dragon. You abandoned your own people. You're a horrible person. You are the reason that Minrathous is destroyed. You're the reason all these people, they punish you for the decision that you make. And that's the thing that really, really upsets me. It's not so much the idea of there's no good choices, there's just two bad ones, but they treat you like you make the wrong decision no matter what you do, to the point where Nev leaves the party for a decent amount of the game. And going forward, it permanently changes the character of Nev. Like, she no longer can use her healing abilities. It completely blocks off one of the 6 skills that she has. It completely defeats your ability to use one of those 6 skills. And for the rest of the adventure, Nev is pissed off at you. And for her character story, you are no longer allowed to make choices for her character story. They're all chosen for you. You are punished for the rest of the game over this one decision. And nothing about that is really hinted. It's never happened in a Dragon Age game before. You've had to make tough decisions where, again, there's no good decision, there's just a less bad one, but you've never had one of your companions spend the rest of the game blaming you for it. So that in and of itself was not fun. I don't think it was particularly well written because, again, the dialogue delivery is very, very flat. The writing itself doesn't make sense. So there are ways that they could have written it to where Nev had a kind of that really scarred her. They didn't do any of that. You know, there wasn't things like, you know, I trusted you, you know, and you just betrayed my trust to save who? Because again, the choice you are given is between a city getting put under martial law, which is bad, or the entire population of a city being poisoned and slowly dying. There really isn't a choice there. It's, do we want to save innocents or do we want to protect people from being put under martial law for a little while until we overthrow it? Because that's the entire purpose of the Shadow Dragons. They never mention anything about innocents dying or anything like that. And both characters are standing right next to each other as they're making their pleas. So the idea of Nev going, I can't believe you chose to save innocent people that were going to die a slow, painful death where they're slowly turned into monsters and are forced to kill their loved ones. I can't believe you chose to do that instead of stopping people from getting put under martial law for a few months. it doesn't make sense. Like, she reacts like we stabbed her in the back, like we ordered the dragon to go there. And again, there are ways that they could have written it to make it make a lot more sense that Nev, but the purpose of it wasn't like, it wasn't a character driven decision. It wasn't a motivation driven decision. It was, we are going to ensure that the player is punished no matter what they do. And that again is bad writing. It massively turned me off. Especially since I really like the Shadow Dragons. And after that decision, the Shadow Dragons stop existing. You can no longer buy from their vendor. You have a significantly harder time increasing their power, because one of the main ways that you increase their power is by selling them shit. And you can't do that anymore because their vendor's gone. It also means that all of the unique outfits and items that are tied to the Minrathi vendor, you can no longer purchase. And a lot of them are locked behind you building them up to a certain level, and you're never able to build them up to that level or unlock any of it after that. None of this is even hinted at before you make that decision. So that in and of itself was just not fun. And that same thing happens, like I said, 2 other times, including in the final battle. It happens, I think it happens 2 separate times in the final battle, where you make a decision and you are punished for that decision. There isn't a way to not get punished. Like, you are given a bad decision, and not only is it a bad decision, but you will be blamed for that decision. You won't get, you made a tough call. It is always, you made the wrong call and you're a bad person because you made that call. And again, that's just bad writing. I have been in situations where there wasn't a good decision, there was just a less bad decision. And that's not how people react to that, ever. Even the people that get hurt by the bad decision, the less bad decision, don't react that way. The writers that were writing this have never been in a situation where there was just 2 bad decisions. It's blatantly obvious because they had no idea how to write it. They had no idea, because your character eventually has to struggle with that idea of, you know, there wasn't a good idea, there wasn't a good choice. It was just 2 bad choices. And again, if you've been in a leadership position, you will invariably get into a position where you don't have a good choice. You just have 2 bad choices. And you have to make a bad choice. And it's something that you struggle with. For a long time, you will struggle with that decision, depending on how bad the less bad thing was. Like a lot of times in situations like mine, a lot of times it's an incident of somebody losing their job over something that happened. And losing your job is never a good thing, but if you get to know your employees and things like that, there's a lot of times where good people make bad decisions, and as management, you are forced to make the decision of, well, it doesn't really matter that you're a good worker, that you're a good person. This particular mistake you made was so big that there's nothing I can do. I personally have to fire you, and it is my decision. It's not that I'm being told I have to fire you. As a good manager, I cannot allow you to continue working here. And unfortunately, because of the decision that you made, there's a very good chance that you're never going to work in this particular field again. That's the lesser of 2 evils kind of decision that you generally have to make in management. Is either you can try to protect the quote-unquote good person and cause a lot of other people to either lose their jobs or just have kind of extreme backlash, or you can fire the quote-unquote good person, and because of how they have to be fired, basically kind of ruin their life just because they made a mistake, but the mistake was massive. Yeah, it's something that you struggle with for a very, very long time. They tried to write a scene like that, and it just falls so completely flat because they don't talk about any of the things that someone that's had to make a bad decision struggles with. Things like maybe I was too quick to make the first thought every single time. The first thought is, what if I didn't look at all the options? What if there was another option and I just didn't consider it? That's the first thing that you do every single time. It's like, what if I was too short-sighted? What if this wasn't a choice between two bad decisions? It was me being stupid and not seeing that there was a third decision that was blatantly obvious. Maybe I'm just a really, really bad person that just ruins someone's life for no reason. That doesn't exist in this Kika conversation. And then other the things, well, maybe there was a way to mitigate it. Maybe there was, maybe if, what if I made the other decision and things like that. Like, those are all things that go through your head after some. None of that really happens. You just get this really kind of bland, well, it was a tough decision and I don't know how to live with myself. And then Varric comes over and goes, hey, tough decisions are tough, and you're a super cool guy. I don't know why you're a super cool guy, because I've only known you for a year, and we never really reveal how we have such a close relationship, because all of our relationship building was done off screen. But you're a super cool guy, and of course you made the right decision. And that's all you ever get. So that in and of itself, I really, really hated. The other thing from a storytelling perspective that really sucks about this game is the idea of show don't tell. I talked about it in my first impressions of a video. They are so intent on ensuring that you understand absolutely everything that is going on, that instead of allowing you to experience it and infer things on your own, after every single story mission and every single character mission, and a couple of the side missions, Varric will come on screen and explain everything that happened and tell you what's going to happen next. Every single time. There was not a single surprising moment in the game because before you could be surprised about a plot twist, Varric had already told you that the plot twist was coming. Every single time. In addition to that, you would have all these characters that would just do exposition dumps instead of, like, a really, really good example. Very early on in the game, you come across a town that has been blighted. And as you're going through the town, you can see a vast portion of the remaining population. A lot of the population's dead. The rest of the population is not only blighted, but kind of like zombified, where they're there, but they don't seem to understand. Anytime you try to interact with them, they'll just say the same couple lines, repeating. And it's not just that they were badly coded NPCs. No, like the player characters go, that's really weird. I wonder why they keep saying the same thing over and over again. They intentionally were kind of zombified. You get to the end and you find the mayor, who is trapped by these living blight vines. The first line of dialogue when you get to the mayor is one of your companion goes, you sold them out. You did this on purpose and you killed your entire town. That is a tell don't show. There was really nothing to indicate that the mayor had sold anyone out. They were the only person in the town that was not blighted, but they were still being strangled by blight. So it's possible they were just the last person blighted. There was nothing really indicating that the mayor had sold anybody out. There were tiny little hints and things like that, but there was nothing that would make it so blatant that a character, not the players all knew that the mayor was doing something wrong. But a character would be able to instantly know, you sold them out. So instead of writing the dialogue where you get to, your characters slowly get to kind of understand what's going on, they just instantly tell you, oh, this is the bad guy and this is why he's the bad guy. That is tell, don't show. Showing it would have been getting there and seeing the mayor going there and going, oh shit, you're not blighted. Hey, we'll get you out there as quickly as we can. Why aren't you blighted? That's not really important right now. Just save me. Well, yeah, we're totally going to do that, but not only are you not blighted, you're surrounded by blight, but it's not infecting you. What's going on here? What Why aren't you blighted? Well. It's simply because I found not buying that. What did you do? What did you do? Fine. I thought that this and this and this and this. Oh my God! You sold out your town. What did you sell it out for? Well, they showed me a lot of money. You sold your town out for gold. Holy shit. That would have been a really interesting, compelling scene because you get to kind of grow and you get to feel that dread as you, as the player, are already pretty sure what's going on. But as the characters slowly come to the realization, oh my God, this person just murdered an entire, not just murdered, but infected them with something that doesn't just kill you, but transforms you into a monster that then will kill other people that you love. Like, it is a fate worse than death. And you just condemned not only just you condemned a city, you condemned the city that you were hired to run and protect because they gave you some gold shiny stuff. That is not, like, most people have a hard time instantly jumping to that conclusion because, again, that doesn't make sense. A normal human being would never make that decision. And that's why it's generally so important when you are doing, when you're having a character that's made a decision like that, to allow the other characters to slowly come to that conclusion, because it feels more real. Your default assumption, unless you were just a very, very bad person in general, because projection's a real thing, and so if you are a kind of person that would definitely make that decision, if somebody paid you enough, you would sacrifice an entire town, that's the first thing that you will go to. So unless you are a psychopath, that's not the first thing, that's not the first explanation your brain will come to. And so by allowing the characters to kind of go through the process of, wait a minute, this seems weird. How could this be true? Oh my God. And slowly coming to that conclusion, not only does it allow you to experience what's happening, but it also shows you that the other characters are not psychopaths that would instantly assume, oh yeah, makes perfect sense. Give someone a lot of money, though they will sacrifice an entire town to a fate worse than death. Totally. And they don't do that. And that happens constantly throughout the adventure. You get these exposition dumps instead of allowing the characters and the player themselves to experience this story. And I mentioned it before, it's a sign of either a bad writer or an inexperienced writer. Either someone that doesn't have the skills and experience to know how to write a good story, or someone that simply refuses to learn how to write a good story. And so that shows up constantly throughout the storytelling aspect of this. There's another thing that really, really annoyed me. One of the characters, Balara, is kind of, they're kind of an artificer, which is super, super cool. But the thing that they specialize in is fixing magical artifacts, which, again, really, really cool. But there's a couple scenes where they're trying to fix the magical artifact and they have to use technobabble. And if you've watched any science fiction ever, technobabble is not supposed to be something that quote unquote makes sense or anything like that. Like in Star Trek, and I think Stargate as well. I don't know if they did it in the original series, but I do know in the Next Generation, the ones further, when there was something like, oh, the warp core is going to breach. Well, if we shunt the excess power through auxiliary B, all that technobabble stuff, when you're doing the table read of that, it will say something like technobabble or technojargon or something, and they will write that particular technobabble later. They will just put that in there because the writers themselves don't actually have a knowledge of how the technology works. And there's generally only a few writers that actually understand how the technology works. And so instead of just writing random science words in there, they will just leave, okay, put something in there. And then they will give it to the person that's their actual expertise to put the actual stuff in there. There's one scene in particular where Balara has to use some technobabble, and it is blatantly obvious that they just put science-sounding words in there that make no sense put together. And that is just insulting to the player base, because it's basically going, well, if I use enough big words, they're just they're just going to accept that it really means something. If you're going to use technobabble, you need to at least create the physics enough to where the technobabble has an actual meaning. And this random collection of science sounding words didn't. It was just random scientific sounding words. And again, it's just massively insulting to the audience. And again, it just shows it's just an example of an inexperienced writer. An experienced writer would understand that, okay, I have to, if I'm going to try and technobabble, either I need to go, well, I was going to do, you know what, this is really complicated. Suffice it to say, it didn't work. Like, you can do that if you don't want to take the time to actually figure out the in-world physics of how it would work. Or you can figure out the in-world physics. Those are the only two options you have. If you're just going to spew technobabble, everyone knows that it's nonsense words. You could use anything. You could just use gibberish. You could go, well, I was going to blah, 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 but then I decided to Google blah, 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 but then these went and made it go, and it means the exact same thing. And the audience is very, very aware that these words have absolutely no meaning. So yeah, like I said, the entire story was obviously written by either inexperienced or bad writers. Now, the overall story still really good, still really interesting, but the day-to-day and the dialogue and stuff like that is just bad. It's not bad enough to ruin the game for me. Again, I think it's a good game with a lot of flaws. And I think a lot of it was whoever was in charge of the overarching story actually took the time to create a really interesting story that tied in with stuff going all the way back to Dragon Age Origins. That was something that I really, really enjoyed. But the day-to-day stuff, the character interaction, stuff like that is just poorly written. So, yeah. So, overall, final thoughts, whatever you want to call it. Again, the game itself is a good game with a lot of flaws. Anyone that's claiming this should be Game of the Year is smoking something. This is not Game of the Year material. There were a lot better games that came out this year. That being said, I do not regret spending money on it. I've beaten the game as a mage. I didn't get absolutely everything. There's still a few chests and a few other collectible kind of things that I may go back to my final save before the big bad end guy and go back and just kind of finish up those the things, just because I really enjoyed the game. But other than that, like, I'm planning on starting a new playthrough probably tonight, because I had fun with the mage. I want to do a playthrough as a warrior. I want to do a playthrough as the rogue. And I want to choose different backgrounds, because the backgrounds in and of themselves are really interesting. Probably the only ones that I'm not really sold on. I'm not a big fan of the Mornwatch. Necromancy is not my thing. And I'm not a big fan of, I think they're called the Lords of Glory or something like that. They're basically, if you played the D&D Adventures League in the early seasons, there was 5 different factions. The Lords of Glory, or whatever they're called, Tosh's faction, they're basically the Lord's Alliance. Like, that's all they are. They're the economically motivated people. It's rich people. Or the employees of rich people, let's put it that way. The Lord's Alliance, the Lords actually don't do anything themselves, but they spend lots of money getting underlings to do things for them. That's kind of what that group is. So, yeah, overall, I had fun with the game. I loved the ending. I think it's probably the strongest ending of any of the Dragon Age games that I've played thus far. I'm really upset that they're not going to be doing DLC for it. because I think this game could definitely benefit from some DLC. But it is what it is. It's underperformed because their marketing for it was bad, and then they started attacking their fan base, which has we've already been shown that attacking your fan base is a fantastic way to have your product fail. It's how it works. They need to stop doing that. They are learning slowly but surely. Attacking the fan base is a remarkably stupid move, and companies as a whole are firing all the people that are doing that right now. So we'll see. If you're on the fence about playing Dragon Age, if you are Dragon Age: The Veilguard, if you're a fan of Dragon Age and you like action-oriented action combat systems, you're going to have fun with this game. Depending on your opinion about left-leaning issues, there's probably going to be quite a few things that either you love absolutely to death because they're totally realistic portrayals of the real... They're not in any way, shape, or form, but for some odd reason the left thinks that's how the real world works. You're either going to really enjoy it or it's going to annoy the hell out of you. But it's light enough that you can ignore it to stick with the game itself. And like I said, the game is fun. The main story is interesting. It gets a little bit tropey at points, and they will ensure that you are punished for the decisions that you make. But if you get past that, it's a really engaging, fun story. It rewrites a little bit of Theda's history, which irked me at first, but I'm kind of fine with it now. And it does reveal a lot of stuff that was never explained before. And that, for lore hounds and stuff like that, that's going to be a huge, huge thing. Is just how immense the amount of new lore is. Again, especially since they get to describe like 6 different societies that have never really been explored. I mean, Tevinter somewhat was explored with Dorian in Inquisition, but now we get to go to Tevinter. We get to interact with people. You can be from Tevinter. You can be a Tevinter citizen. So you get to learn about Antiva and the Crows, and you get to interact with them, and you get to interact with Navarre, and you get to go to the Anderfells. Like all these really cool places that have only been talked about, you actually get to go there and you get to interact with the people that are there. It's really, really cool. I just wish they had a more experienced team writing, because a lot of the problems that I had could have been fixed if they just had a better writing staff. And I get it. You know, a lot of people going, well, they did the best that they could. Their best wasn't good enough, to be blunt. A lot of the problems were not like, oh, that was an interesting choice. It was, oh, you obviously never learned how to write well. Sorry. It's how it works. So, anyway, this is a really long video, but it's all for me today. See you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye-bye.